Good afternoon. We will now call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting for December 17th, 2012. First item on our agenda is consideration of the minutes for the regular meeting from November 19th, 2012. Those were provided to the board members. Are there any changes that need to be made to those?
No.
Seeing none, those will stand as approved. We'll move on to new business. Our first item is a weeds and grass exemption. It's application W12064 by Mr. Max Moss, Jr. for Three Oaks Development Company, LLC, requesting an exemption from the weeds and grass ordinance on property located along the north side of North Tennessee Boulevard, just south of Mosaic Trail and Terra Green Court. It is requested that the property return to a natural state or as a wilderness area. Matthew, would you review that for us?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. As you mentioned, our first item is a weeds and grass exemption request. The subject property is located on the north side of North Tennessee Boulevard. We have the aerial photograph on the big screen. It's a vacant tract that is about 14 or 15 acres, owned by Three Oaks Development, and the applicant, Mr. Max Moss, Jr., is the chief manager for Three Oaks Development Company. The property is zoned commercial fringe, never been developed though. It is, and as you can see on the aerial photograph, it is just to the east of the Retreat at Northwoods residential condominium development, which is zoned PRD, and it is just to the south of the Northwoods subdivision, which is zoned RZ, residential zero lot line, but is developed as traditional single-family residential lots. Just to the east of the subject tract is the Wycliffe apartment complex. As you mentioned, the subject property is identified as tax map 81, parcel 1, and according to the Building and Codes Department, the part of section 14-53 that applies to this property is as follows. It shall be cut, clipped, or controlled through chemical means at least twice between March 1st and November 30th of each year, with cuttings or clippings being at least 3 months apart. Also, since it is adjacent to improved residential property, it shall be kept clipped to the same standards as small tracts within 50 feet of such improved residential property. A copy of this portion of section 14-53 has been included in the board's agenda materials. And also included for your reference is a memo prepared by Mr. Ives back in 2011 after the City Council adopted this procedure. This is the third such request that we've had for a weeds and grass exemption since the City Council adopted this procedure. And just to kind of further outline what must be done according to the ordinance is the area that is not heavily wooded. In other words, the eastern half of the tract is heavily wooded and is actually possibly delineated as wetlands. So it is automatically exempt from the requirement to maintain it. However, the western half of the tract is not wooded. Portions of it are beginning to be wooded, but not to the extent as the eastern half of the tract. So as I mentioned, it must be cut, clipped, or controlled through chemical means at least twice annually. And then the areas that are, as you can see, adjacent to these homes on Mosaic Trail and Terra Green Court would have to be cut or clipped to less than 12 inches continuously within 50 feet of those improved residential lots. So that's the standard that it is currently being held to, and after receiving a notice that it was not compliant with the city's weeds and grass ordinance, Mr. Moss made application on behalf of the ownership group for this weeds and grass exemption request for it to change back to what we would call a natural state or a wilderness area. City staff visited the site after the application was made. During the site visit, it was discovered that there is an active construction area on site. And what I'll do is I'll show you some photographs of the subject property. First of all, here is, as I mentioned, there are possibly some wetlands on the subject property. This was a previous development plan for that section of Northwoods just to the north. And the engineer who designed that section of Northwoods did identify some wetlands on the wooded portion of the tract. Some photographs of the property. This is looking north from North Tennessee Boulevard. Looking northeast from North Tennessee Boulevard at the frontage of the subject tract. And this is a view of the wooded portion of the subject tract. And this is looking back west towards the Retreat at Northwoods residential condo development, which is currently under development. And this is looking to the north towards the Northwoods subdivision. Those are houses on Mosaic Trail in the background of that photograph. And this is looking to the northeast towards the Northwoods subdivision. As you can see there, the tract, which I believe it's been quite a number of years since it has been maintained, is actually starting to, there are some trees that have begun growing over the last number of years. And there has been some use of the property unbeknownst to the owner. Once again, this is looking back towards the Northwoods subdivision. Some folks have been on the property creating a BMX bike track, as you can see in this photograph. Quite an elaborate one, too, I must say. This is looking east towards the wooded portion of the subject property. And this is the area of active construction near the west property line being used in conjunction with the Retreat at Northwoods development. A number of years ago, Mr. Moss gave permission to the developers of the Retreat at Northwoods condos to stockpile their dirt and soils on this property and for use at a future time. So when they graded the site at the Retreat at Northwoods, they left some of their stockpile of materials on this site. And so there's actually a portion of this site that is actively being used to excavate materials and take to the condominium development. So that area, by definition, cannot go back to a natural state as it's currently being actively used. So we informed Mr. Moss that this particular portion of the development could not be included in the request. And subsequently, and you can see here the contours. This is the rise here. It rises about almost 20 feet. That mound of dirt that's been stockpiled, as you can see, it's about a 628 contour at the top, all the way down to about 610, 608. So, and it's hard to tell on this PDF, but you can see this area here. It's a 120 by 255 area where that stockpile is that he has requested to be excluded from this request. You'll find a printed out copy of an email in front of you in which Mr. Moss requests that area be excluded, but that the remainder of the tract be included in the request. Included with the agenda materials is the letter from the applicant outlining his request and the reasons for his request. That second sentence in the second to last paragraph, which says that the applicant is requesting that the entire property be exempted from the weeds and grass ordinance, was true at the time I wrote it, but as I just mentioned, he has since excluded that 120 by 255 area. Staff has also included for the board's reference the correspondence that has been received from neighboring property owners objecting to the request. As you may remember, the process that these requests go through is that once an application for an exemption is made to the Building and Codes Department, neighbors have 30 days to respond in writing objecting to the request. If there is a written response to the Building and Codes Director objecting to the request. Then if the applicant wishes to pursue the request, then it automatically goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a public hearing. And that is the reason why we are here today. Mr. Moss, one of the Mr. Mosses, was not able to be here today, Mr. Moss Jr., but representing him is Mr. Max Moss Sr. He is representing the application today. And I believe he'll have a short presentation or a short statement regarding the Three Oaks request. And then he'll be here to answer questions, and staff will be here to answer questions as well, including myself, Mr. Ives from our legal department, Mr. Sam Huddleston from our engineering department, and Mr. Gary Whitaker from our building and codes department. So I believe Mr. Moss would like to come up and make a statement, and then we'll need to open up the public hearing for this request. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions for Matthew at this point? If not, Mr. Moss, you have something you'd like to present to us?
I'm Max Moss Sr., and I'm here representing Three Oaks Development. I'm a part owner in that. My son couldn't be here, so he nominated me to be here. I'd like to give you a little history of the development. Some of it's on this page, some of it's not. We obtained this property in the year 2000. There was 80 acres, and it was part of the Jimmy and Gwendolyn Richardson's farm, which had been as a family farm. And we then proceeded to develop it. We did it in 7 sections. I think we developed about 150 or 60 lots, and we developed, then was about close to 14 acres of commercial property. And as we were developing it, we noticed there was a lot of wildlife on it, deer, especially deer and turkey. And as each development was made, homes were built, people moved in, and as the community developed, people started commenting that they liked to see the deer and the turkey in their area. So we completed the development in 2005. So we decided to leave the commercial part just as general cover and growth as it had been since we'd had the property. And we had no complaints about that. And when we completed it in 2005, to just lately, we'd had the property about 12 years. So, and now I still think that you can see deer and turkey around in that area, and I think with the commercial that besides the wetlands, it does leave a lot of cover for them. So that's one of the reasons that we're requesting that it remain as a natural cover. Any questions that I could answer?
Any questions for Mr. Moss at this time? I don't think so. Thank you, Mr. Moss. At this time, we'll conduct the public hearing. If there's anyone present that wishes to speak for or against the application, please come forward. State your name and address and any comments you might have.
My name is Dr. Fred Marino. I live at 2009 Terra Green Court, adjacent to this property. And I'm glad to hear what Mr. Moss just said, because most of my neighbors and I are in complete agreement with what he just said, that we keep this area as a wildlife buffer. We do have a tremendous amount of wildlife. They're trapped there on the Woodfin property and that corridor. They have nowhere to go. And we really do enjoy that. When we moved in, our understanding was that treat area was a wetland, dedicated wetland that could never be developed. When I first went down to the Planning Commission, when I saw a real estate sign go up, I saw that it was changed over to fringe commercial and taken out of a wetland, bought out of a wetland is what I was told. The area that is, you mentioned with the dirt piles, that's semi-cleared or was fairly cleared when we moved in 2006. that's a different area. But we were quite surprised that wetland had been bought out. As far as we understand, that's what we were told by the planning department. Then that's how you have it now on your map as fringe commercial, as I understand it. Is that correct?
If you'd like to go ahead, then I'll answer questions after.
Okay. So if Mr. Moss and Max Moss or Jr. are open to leaving this wetland and a wildlife area, we're thrilled to death. There's one of my neighbors who would like to see it mowed because he just built a house there, and when he has his house shown, it would look better if it was mowed for him. The rest of us would very much like it left the way it is. It gives us tremendous protection. The wildlife are wonderful, but we've had a number of, when that was a little lower, we had a lot of traffic through there. We had a lot of burglaries of cars in the area. Laptops were taken. Since this is built up enough that you really can't get through it any longer, then things have quieted down. We don't get that traffic going through, taking that shortcut, because you can take that straight from the area of the semi-cleared land. You can take it all the way to Northwoods proper. There's ways that the kids find to get on through, bicycles, walking. And, you know, we're thrilled to see the kids, but we weren't too thrilled to see our things get stolen and our neighborhood violated. Some of us have put up fences. Some of us have prepared by putting up Leyland cypress, trying to make some natural blockage. But I think the majority of my neighbors, we've been part of the neighborhood association for years. I've talked to the neighbors that are on Mosaic. Again, other than the one, everybody else would like it left in a wild state. But that's not what we're asking for here. The Mosses are out, and they're just asking to be let out of mowing it. They could sell it tomorrow and start construction. So what I'm asking for is some stability. If their interest truly is to have a wildlife buffer, can we have some sort of commitment that it'll stay that way? At least the wetland part that they bought out of being a wetland, if I'm correct about that. So if their intent is what he just said, we're all for it. But I don't think that's really the intent. I think the intent is not to mow it until they sell it. Got a huge sign on it by Mr. Sims. I don't think that tells me that their interest is in having a wetland or a wildlife preserve. I think they're just trying to get out of maintaining it until they sell it. I could be wrong, but certainly all of us, and indirectly we bought these properties from Three Oaks Development, I think it is, because our contractors bought those lots from them. And we all bought into that, thinking we were backing up to a wetland that would never, ever be developed. And now, as far as I know, it's fringe commercial. So.
Is that all the comments you have, Dr. Moreno?
Yes.
We can address we've got the city staff here that will probably be able to address wetlands and what options are available to them.
If they're, I don't know if you wanted to continue the public hearing in case there's anybody else that wanted to
Okay,
speak.
that's fine. Is there anybody else present would like to speak to this application? You want to address his question and then let Mr. Moss come back after the?
Sure.
Okay. We'll close the public hearing and we'll let Matthew answer his question, and then we'll give you a chance to.
As far as the zoning of the property and the existence of wetlands, they're kind of two different things. The property could be zoned residential, it could be zoned commercial. Then that wouldn't have any impact on whether there are wetlands or not. The existence of wetlands is exclusive to whether or not it's zoned residential or commercial. For example, when that property was rezoned to commercial fringe, it didn't. If there were wetlands there, just because it was zoned commercial, doesn't mean that it's not, that there are no wetlands there anymore. The zoning is just the land use entitlement, and that's exclusive of whether or not there are wetlands, and any development on the property would have to take into consideration whether there are wetlands on the property. Mr. Huddleston on our engineering staff may be able to speak more towards whether or not those wetlands are officially delineated or not. As I mentioned and as I showed, they show up on one of the previous plans, but that eastern half of the property is what we would consider to be heavily wooded. So, and Mr. Whitaker can correct me if I'm wrong, but that eastern half, because it is heavily wooded, would not be subject to the same standards as the western half of the property.
Good afternoon, Mr. Huddleston.
Thank you, Chairman Young, members of the Planning Commission, or BZA. Used to speak in the Planning Commission, sorry about that. Sam Huddleston with the Engineering Department. We encounter properties in Rutherford County, the city of Murfreesboro, that have areas that are identified as wetlands. Wetlands, a designation by the Corps of Engineers and also by the state of Tennessee. And we recognize those designations in some of our ordinances on property maintenance and stormwater quality. When a property is proposed for development and it has wetlands identified, the developer is obligated to either protect those wetlands or receive permission from the Corps of Engineers and the state of Tennessee to disturb those wetlands. We have not seen a development plan for the commercial fringe zone properties, and so the wetlands would continue to be there, the zoning would continue to be in place, and that's really not a conflict until we see a development plan for those properties in the future.
So, Mr. Huddleston, you are saying that there is an area on this map that is still considered wetlands. Is that a correct statement?
I believe that to be an accurate statement.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And either you, Mr. Huddleston, or Mr. Blomley, is that wetlands even outside the scope of the heavily wooded area, or would you think it would still just be encompassed in that heavily wooded area?
Both wetlands and heavily wooded areas are already exempted from the weeds and grass ordinance, and as they're located on the property, they're kind of at the same location. So that eastern half of the property is already, per the ordinance, exempted from the weeds and grass maintenance requirements.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting statement about property use, but the property will tell us a lot about its history, and Mr. Moss rehearsed some of that with us, but as we look back through the aerial photography on this property, you could very clearly see the heavily treed area, heavily wooded area, and I think that goes back to the farmer's difficulty in using that property. Is too grown up to pasture, and it was too wet to plow. So the property itself developed over the years to have some of its own protections for those wetlands. We did see, I think, a fairly consistent use of the property to the west for what I would consider either pasture or hay, and it appeared to be fairly well maintained before the the Northwoods development was proposed. And of course, we do see just a little bit of impact on the western and southern edge of the property where it was used for construction. But the property itself helped identify the areas of wetlands just by their property maintenance practices.
I have one more comment. So, Mr. Huddleston, Mr. Blomley, it would be a fair comment to say, being that I'm on the Planning Commission also, as you explained, the wetlands or the heavily wooded area has no impact on the commercial fringe piece. So if the Three Oaks development comes up with a plan of development with respects to commercial fringe, of course, at this point in time, until that happens, this will in fact remain, if we don't, if we grant this exemption, this will remain the same as it is now, meaning where the turkeys and the animals are going through it, and they won't have to mow it. But when a site plan comes before the Planning Commission, at that point, that's when we'll use the word this area, other than the wetlands, possibly, and the heavily wooded area would be compromised or would change in any fashion or form. And at that point, we would be dealing with any landscape berms or the type of landscape berms that would have to be between the residential area and the commercial fringe. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. If this request is granted, it's not, saying that in perpetuity that it will remain as a wilderness area. It would remain as a wilderness area or in a natural state until such time as the owner decided that he no longer wished for it to remain in that state, whether that be by proposing a development. Once it becomes an area of active construction, much like the 120 by 255 foot area that is not a part of this request, it can no longer be considered a natural state. So this wouldn't, if this request is granted, it wouldn't preclude him in the future from presenting a development plan to the Planning Commission for review and approval.
Nor would the opposite, meaning if it is or isn't granted, doesn't preclude the fact of him developing it in commercial fringe one way or the other.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. With any further questions we need to address, Mr. Moss, did you have some other options you wanted to?
You just about addressed what I was talking about. I think
Okay.
it was about 14 acres of that property, and I think about 5 acres was committed to the wetlands area. The other about 9 acres was not. So the 5 acres you can't disturb that at all anyway, and unless you get it out of wetlands. So I think he stated those questions for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or?
I'll make a comment and then I'll go ahead and make a motion. I think that based upon what I understand and based upon at least one Dr. Marino's comments that he wants to leave it at this state, I would say as long as possible, that the best of both worlds for the time frame that is available to us, based upon the fact that Three Oaks doesn't have any development plans at this point, that we would in fact grant this exemption and request. And so that being said, I would make a motion that we do grant the weeds and grass exemption request.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application's been approved.
And just to clarify, that's for the area as it was revised by Mr. Moss earlier this week and as shown before you.
Correct. Thank you for coming in. Our next application is a special use permit and variance request, application Z12065 by Mr. Josh Houston, making the following request for property located in a residential single-family RS12 zone at 2926 Frank Robinson Drive. The first portion of the application is a special use permit in order to establish an accessory apartment, and the second portion is a variance from Section 9D2A6 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that an accessory apartment shall not exceed 700 square feet of floor area. Matthew, if you would review that for us.
Thank you, Chairman Young. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The application that you have before you today is a two-part application. It's for the property located at 2926 Frank Robinson Drive, which is in the Ridgeport subdivision, located along the north side of Osborne Lane. 2926 Frank Robinson is located more specifically at the southeast corner of Frank Robinson and Kitty Court. Mr. Houston, the property owner and the applicant, constructed the house on 2926 several years ago, and last year he purchased the lot directly to the rear of his property which is to the east of the subject property, in order to build a detached garage. The detached garage has been constructed, and during the course of reviewing the existing construction, it was determined that even though Mr. Houston does not intend to use this as an accessory apartment, it had all of the elements of an accessory apartment, and that he needed to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit because it had all of the elements of a special use permit. So you have the aerial photograph before you, and you'll notice that the location of Mr. Houston's house is where the word site is, and he purchased the lot just to the rear where it's denoted detached garage / accessory apartment on that lot. He did combine those two lots into one lot of record. And you'll see this site plan. You see the location of the detached garage directly to the rear of the house and the location of the former lot line on the subject property. You also have a floor plan. The first floor is Mr. Houston's, the garage portion of the detached structure. And as you'll see, there is, it's a three-car detached garage, an area for vehicles, recreational equipment, and there's also a bathroom and an area for pool storage in there as well. He does anticipate constructing a pool in between this detached garage and the existing house. Now, the second floor is where we kind of had to do some thinking and taking into account Mr. Houston's anticipated use of this property, but also taking into account the elements that the second floor had and whether or not we had to consider it an accessory apartment per our zoning ordinance. Now, you'll see that as you come up the stairs here, there is an area that he's labeled as a wet bar. It's actually a small kitchen. There was a stove in there, and he has removed the stove. But if he's granted the special use permit, it would give him the option of putting the stove back in. There's a large open area here that could possibly be used for entertaining in the future, as kind of a feature as one might have in a pool house, for example. And there are two rooms which may be considered as, or which we are considering as the bedrooms, even though Mr. Houston has indicated that he does not intend to use those as bedrooms, that he intends to use them as office space. And you'll see it in this one has a half bath, and then this one over here has a full bath. Mr. Houston does sales outside of his home, and currently his home-based business is located inside of the principal structure, inside of his home. One of his reasons for constructing this detached garage was to move his business from his home into the upstairs of the detached garage. Mr. Houston is a Balfour representative and visits many high schools for graduation supplies, class rings, things like that. And so he was looking to have this office space above his garage. He is aware of the home-based business regulations and that no more than 500 square feet of the detached accessory structure can be devoted to the home occupation, and he is willing to comply with that. He has no stated intentions of using this space as an accessory apartment. It would just be used for his office area / entertaining area. And but with that being said, if this request were to be granted, then he or whoever owns the property in the future would have the option of using it as an accessory apartment. And one thing to bear in mind is that accessory apartments cannot be used for a rental unit to non-family members. They can only be used for separate quarters for invited guests or or separate quarters for family members, like a mother-in-law apartment, for example. Mr. Houston has submitted paperwork addressing sections 8 and 9 of the zoning ordinance and how he proposes to meet those standards. There is one thing that he is requesting a variance from, and that is the maximum square footage of the accessory apartment. Our zoning ordinance allows a maximum square footage of 700 square feet for an accessory apartment. The detached accessory structure is approximately 1,400 square feet on each floor. So each floor has about 1,400 square feet. Thus, he is requesting a variance from the 700 square foot maximum size, and because he will, because if this because since this is classified as an accessory apartment, he is exceeding that maximum square footage. Mr. Houston has, in his justification for the variance, indicates that the size of the first floor garage space, which does not count towards the square footage of the accessory apartment, dictated the size of the heated and cooled space that he constructed upstairs. In addition, he states that in his opinion the structure fits with the neighborhood. He also points to the fact that he has no intentions of actually using the accessory apartment as a separate dwelling unit. As mentioned earlier, though, the board should remember that the granting of the special use permit will not preclude the accessory apartment from being used as a separate dwelling unit in the future. The manner of its use as a separate dwelling unit, however, would be limited to what is specified in the zoning ordinance, which I mentioned just a little while ago. Here are some photographs. That's the photograph of the front of the house viewed from Frank Robinson Drive. And this is looking back. You still in the foreground you see the Mr. Houston's house, and in the background you see the brand new accessory structure. And this is looking down Kitty Court at the new detached garage. And this is just a view of the property to the northeast on Kitty Court. And this is looking across Kitty Court. It was cold and rainy that day. I think Mrs. Houston can attest to that. I saw her out there. Obviously, this was taken on a different day.
Not that day.
This is a view of the front of the detached garage as it faces Kitty Court. As I mentioned, it's a 3-car garage, and you see there's a porch on the right-hand side of the page. That porch faces the back of the house. This is the kitchen area, and there's actually a little gap that you can't see here where the stove could be placed if Mr. and Mrs. Houston choose to, if they're approved. This is the open living area adjacent to the kitchen. This is the bedroom/office number 1 with a half bath. And this is the bedroom/office number 2 with a full bath. This is just a view of the garage on the first floor of the accessory structure. And then it's another shot of the garage. As I mentioned, Mr. Houston has addressed the other standards for accessory apartments in his application. If the board desires to approve this application, staff recommends the following condition. A deed restriction must be recorded stating that the accessory structure will not be used as a rental unit to non-family members, and that it will be used in a manner consistent with the zoning regulations for accessory apartments. And that is with regards to the special use permit application, not the variance request. And I believe Mr. Houston is amenable to this condition if the board so chooses. This is the same condition that historically the board has made as a condition of approval for any accessory apartment that it approves. Each of the 2 requests should be taken in a separate motion, both the special use permit and the variance. Mr. Houston is in attendance at the meeting to answer any questions the board may have, and also in attendance is Mr. David Caius, who is representing Mr. Houston as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions either before or after the public hearing.
Any questions? Okay, go
Two
ahead.
questions for you, Mr. Blomley. One is, I got a little lost on, you made a comment that this would, if this was granted, and I may have misunderstood you, would not preclude it being used as a separate dwelling unit in the future. Did I misunderstand you, or what does that exactly mean?
No, it's regardless of what Mr. Houston's intentions are. Say for example, at the present time, he intends to use it as an office and as a pool house, entertaining area. But if, for example, he did wish to use it as a guest house, or if there was an elderly relative who wanted to come live with them, if this is approved, it would not preclude that situation from occurring.
Okay, but that would be the only situation that it could occur.
That is correct.
Okay. My second question is having to do with the second portion of the, the variance on the 700 square feet. So there's not a total square foot limit that we can grant. There's not a maximum, I guess, that is allowed to grant.
No, there's not a maximum. Unlike some of the things in our sign ordinance,
Right.
which there are maximums. A similar situation that you may recall was Mr. Tim Keach in the Mirabella subdivision about 4 or 5 years ago had a similar situation, a detached accessory structure, and the upstairs was what he called his MTSU room, I think, but it had all of the elements of a separate dwelling unit. I believe and he made the same 2 variance requests, because I think the total square footage of his was about 1,100 square feet, which is a little bit smaller than this one, but it was that's probably about the most similar situation that I can compare this to.
When I saw the 700 feet, it made me think it'd make more sense if it was percentage of the main structure that might preclude this situation from coming up, but I didn't remember. That's a good point to bring up. Okay. Any other questions for Matthew at this time? Anything the applicant would like to add, Mr. Koss?
Ms. Mosby and Mr. Young and Mr. Halliburton, good afternoon. I'm really privileged to be here because I've just recently met the Houstons and their family, and they're really a wonderful family and good addition to our community. And I think that they're very well thought of in the community as well as in their neighborhood, which is important in this particular issue. Mr. Blomley is correct in his remarks about what occurred as far as the combination of these lots and Planning Commission approval and building permit for this 2,800 square foot structure on the lot. That all occurred, as Mr. Blomley has correctly stated. It wasn't until this summer when I think the Houstons realized that we've got 1,400 square feet up here above this garage. Let's try to make some use of it. And so it would make an excellent bonus area for their family, as well as fit into their plans for the pool, which will eventually fit between the home and and this new structure. So it looks to me like that is an excellent use of this particular piece of property. Now, I can tell you that that's not exactly what they had in mind to begin with, to make it an accessory apartment. They didn't have intentions to have anybody come up there and live in that area. But when codes went out and looked at it, and I'll have to admit, and Mr. Houston would too probably, that it does look like an apartment up there. I mean, it's very attractive. I could live up there. I hope my wife doesn't kick me out anytime soon, but it is a nice area, and I think that it would be wasteful if they didn't make this application and make use of this wonderful area that they have up there. I think Mrs. Houston wants to kick him out of the dining room table, which is what he's been using for quite a while now for his home office. What's really impressive to me in this situation is that Mr. Houston has taken a good effort to talk to his neighbors. and he's not gotten any resistance from them. And I don't believe there's anybody here from the neighborhood that opposes it either. And I know that's a very sensitive issue with any board, is to make sure that the plans that are being made and the application for variance that's being made doesn't disturb the rest of the neighborhood there, and it obviously does not. That impresses me the most about this application and the way that the Houstons have gone about this application. It fits right into what I think the BZA is here for, and that is to grant a variance when we see that there's something like a 700 square foot minimum, but when you have a situation like they do of a structure that's already there that will have no negative impact on the neighbors or the community, I think that it's an excellent example of what this BZA is here for, and that's to grant this type of application and this variance. Most of you know that my brother-in-law, David Parsons, is the developer of this subdivision and has a lot right next door to it. He not only has approved the combination of these two lots into one, but he's also very much in favor of what the Houstons are wanting to do and the use that they're wanting to do with this, and doesn't believe at all that it would impair or impact the value of the lot that he has there that he's, of course, interested in selling. That wasn't a sales pitch, Mr. Parsons, but anyway. That's all I have to say, and again, I approved everything that Mr. Blomley has said in his comments, and I appreciate those, and if there's any further question I can answer, I'm willing to do that. Any questions from
Thank you, Mr. Koss. Any questions at this point, Mr. Koss? I don't think so. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present that wishing to speak for or against this application? If so, to come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion to our motion. And again, we have two items. The first, the special use permit to establish an accessory apartment.
I'll make a motion that we grant the special use permit subject to all staff comments.
I will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That portion has been approved. Next, we'll move to the variance of the 700 feet for the accessory apartment.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the variance request, subject to the comments of the staff.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you guys for coming in. Our next application is a special use permit request, application Z12066 by Mr. and Miss Brian and Janet Lee, requesting a special use permit in order to establish an accessory apartment in a residential single-family RS-15 zone for property located at 1521 Avellino Circle. Matthew, can you review that one for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The subject property at 1521 Avellino Circle is in the Mirabella subdivision. It's zoned RS-15. There's an existing single-family home on the property. Mr. and Mrs. Brian and Janet Lee are the homeowners, and they wish to construct a detached accessory structure. And when their contractor, Ms. Nicole Bird, came in a number of weeks ago, and we were discussing it, we were discussing what would have to be excluded from the structure in order for it not to be considered an accessory apartment, because the intention of the lease is to use it as a pool house. The lease stated that they wanted to have those elements, a bedroom with a closet, a full kitchen, not only for the convenience that would give for its use as a pool house, because they do intend to construct a pool in the backyard as well, but also in the event that they ever do wish to use it as an accessory apartment. So the lease had made application for a special use permit in order to be able to construct an accessory apartment on the property. And now you see the aerial photograph that we have up here right now. It's the subject lot in that kind of circular area of Avellino Circle. It's kind of redundant, what I just said, but at any rate, you see the pond in the back. I believe that's a man-made pond, and they plan on filling that in. There's a little pump house in the back that's currently actually in violation of the setbacks. That's going to be demolished, and the pond will be filled in, make room for the new accessory structure and new pool. And you'll see the site plan. I put the site plan in front of you because we received the site plan after the agendas went out. And you'll see the proposed accessory structure. The actual heated and cooled space in the accessory structure is about 675 square feet. So they're going to fall below that 700 square foot maximum, and they do not need a variance on the maximum size. The total structure, though, will actually slightly exceed that 675 square foot area, because it will have a 162 square foot porch, as well as a 120 square foot storage area for pool equipment. And you see the floor plan in front of you. You see there's an open living area as you enter the pool house. Full bathroom here, small laundry room, bedroom / changing room with closet, and full kitchen here, including a range. The application does appear to meet all of the additional standards. As I mentioned, it is within the maximum square footage allowed. The applicants have indicated that they, as the owners, occupy the main house and that they have no intention to use the accessory apartment as a rental unit to non-family members. As I mentioned in their write-up, they did state that in the future they may wish to use it as a guest house or as possibly a dwelling unit for a family member. The structure is located behind the house in the backyard. The backyard is relatively secluded as there are trees along both the western and northern property lines. The structure as such will have limited visibility from Avellino Circle. Now I do have some photographs here. Here's a view of the front of the house at 1521 Avellino. This is the side of the house at 1521 Avellino along the western lot line. As you can see, there's a stand of trees that separate it from the neighbor to the west. This is a view of the backyard. You can kind of see in the background there's that existing man-made pond and the pump house, which the hand is on right now, which that will be demolished. This is the house next door to the northeast, and this is the house next door to the west. Those are the houses in closest proximity to the sides, and to the rear you can see there's an existing tree line along the northern property line, and you can see the house in the background, which is located in the Bear Branch Cove subdivision. If the board desires to approve the special use permit application, staff recommends the following condition, which is the same condition that was applicable to the last application. A deed restriction must be recorded stating that the accessory apartment will not be used as a rental unit to non-family members and that it will be used in a manner consistent with the zoning regulations for accessory apartments. And just to kind of clarify why the board typically puts this condition on accessory apartment special use permits is that in going through this process, the applicants are very familiar with how the structure can and can't be used. Where we might run into trouble is in the future, once the property changes hands, someone sees that there is a second dwelling unit on the property and might say, oh, you know, I've got a separate rental house in the back of my property. Obviously, that would not be compliant with the zoning regulations, and so there's a deed restriction recorded that puts any future property owners on notice of what this what the structure can and cannot be used for. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Lee are both in attendance to answer any questions that you may have, as is their contractor, Ms. Nicole Bird.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? All right, Mr. and Ms. Lee, anything you'd like to add to the application? Shaking the heads, no. At this time, we'll conduct the public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, please come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion that we approve the special use request along with the comments from the staff.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application's been approved as well. Our next application is a special use permit and an amendment to a special use permit, application Z12067 by Mr. John Harney for World Outreach Church, making the following requests. The first is a special use permit in order to use an outdoor speaker system at an institutional group assembly use, which is a church, in a commercial highway zone for property located at 1833 New Salem Highway. The second portion is an amendment to a previously approved special use permit allowing an institutional group assembly use in a residential single-family RS-15 zone for property located at 1921 New Salem Highway. The applicant wishes to amend the special use permit in order to allow for the use of systems for the external broadcast of speech, music, or other sounds. Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The subject property, as you mentioned, there are two separate parcels which are included in this request. The first is at 1833 New Salem Highway. If we could pull up the aerial photograph. You'll see I've got it denoted on this aerial photograph before you. Both are owned by World Outreach Church. 1833 New Salem Highway is the property right at the southwest corner of New Salem and Barfield. It's what you may see a sign. There's a sign out front that which it's called Leadership Park. So that's the first request. It was zoned commercial highway earlier this year or last year, but within the last year or so, it was zoned a commercial highway. The remainder of the developed church tract at 1921 New Salem Highway, that you can see on the aerial photograph, is zoned RS-15. So because of the two different zoning classifications and with them being on two separate parcels, it warrants two separate requests. Back in 2007, World Outreach Church made application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit for their expansion that they constructed in 2007, 2008. It's the new sanctuary addition that was constructed, and the new parking lot addition. Because it's zoned RS-15, new churches or expansions to existing churches, because churches are considered an institutional group assembly uses, are required to get a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so that special use permit was granted, and the addition was constructed. But earlier this year, the planning staff had received a complaint, and so we went to investigate it. The complaint was with regards to a speaker system that had been installed in the parking lot. And so one of the things that the additional standards for institutional group assembly uses states that the application for a special use permit for an institutional group assembly use shall indicate any intentions for the use of systems for the external broadcast of speech, music, or other sounds. If such are proposed, the applicant shall indicate the times of day and duration of their proposed use. The BZA shall have the authority to place restrictions upon their use in order to minimize excessive noise from intruding upon neighboring properties, especially those zoned or used for residential purposes. In no event shall the BZA approve the use of such which would be in violation of the city code or ordinances regulating noise. BZA approval does not constitute a waiver of any city code or ordinances regulating noise. So when the church made application to the Board of Zoning Appeals, their response to that standard, and one thing that I want to point out is that the standards are slightly different today than they were back in 2007. We had the category of just churches back in 2007, whereas now churches are included in the institutional group assembly category. But while the language has changed a little bit, it essentially states the same thing. And the church's response at that time is that there are no plans for carillons, chimes, or bells. Porches and walkways may be equipped with limited audio to provide directions or modest ambient music. So at that time, there was not anything indicated about the speaker system in the parking lot. It was approved that they would have limited audio in the very vicinity of the building. So earlier this year, the applicants installed speakers at 3 locations in the parking lot, and here I've labeled this aerial photograph. You'll see there is a speaker location here. Oops. One here, just to the west of the church, and one here at the very southwestern parking lot of the church property. After the first complaint that staff received, staff contacted Mr. Harney, and in an effort to help alleviate the noise issues or the noise complaint that we had received, this westernmost speaker was turned off. So right now, what's labeled as the middle speaker and the easternmost speaker are the 2 that are currently operational. The westernmost speaker has been turned off. Directly to the south of the subject property is a single-family residential subdivision that's located in the county. You'll see St. James Street and Winslow Court on the aerial photograph. The speaker in question that, while both speakers appear to be audible at some times to the neighboring properties, the complainant was predominantly hearing the one that's located and it's labeled as middle speaker. And after receiving the complaint, I did go out to the site on Saturdays and Sundays, which is when they were in use, and did verify that the speakers were audible from the adjacent properties to varying degrees depending on time of year, foliage, wind. And after we had gotten several complaints, we did sit down with Mr. Harney and Pastor Jackson and indicated to them that in order for the speakers to remain, that an application to amend the special use permit would have to be made to the Board of Zoning Appeals because these parking lot speakers were not included in the 2007 application. In Mr. Harney's application, he did include not only the large church parcel, but also the large RS-15 zone parcel where the main church campus is located. But as I mentioned earlier, he also included the 1833 New Salem Highway, aka the Leadership Park. It's zoned commercial highway. What our zoning ordinance says about institutional group assembly uses in commercial highway zones is that when there is outdoor speaker systems with institutional group assembly uses in the commercial highway zone, if they have the potential of being heard on residential on adjacent or neighboring residential properties, then a special use permit is required for those as well. So that's why the commercial highway zone property is in a separate request. Because you'll see just along the east side of Barfield Road, there are several houses, depending on the volume of the speakers, in which there is the possibility that if there were speakers placed on the Leadership Park property, that they may be audible to the parcels along the east side of Barfield Road, to the houses there. Mr. Harney, representing the church, has submitted a letter seeking to amend the special use permit in order to allow the use of the outdoor speaker system. As I mentioned, there are currently 3 speaker locations in the parking lot, and he has included a map indicating those locations, and I've also included one as well. In a moment, I'll show you those 3 speaker locations on an aerial, or excuse me, on photography as well. Not aerial photography, but photographs of those speakers. The speakers will be used to broadcast, according to Mr. Harney's letter, ambient music, biblical messages, or audio announcements when there are services or special events at the church. Since the time the speakers were installed, they have been operated primarily on Saturday afternoons and evenings, and on Sundays from morning until evening. Mr. Harney requests in his letter approval to operate the speaker system no earlier than 8 a.m. and no later than 8 p.m. If approved as submitted, the church would not be limited to using the speaker system on just Saturdays and Sundays. Approval of the special use permit as submitted would allow the church to use the speaker system any day of the week between those hours. The board does have the ability, however, to place conditions on the approval of the special use permit and special use permit amendment if it so chooses. Such conditions may include the days and times the speaker system is allowed to operate. While there are 3 existing speaker locations, Mr. Harney also requests as a part of this application the ability for the church to install additional speakers in the future if it desires. The board may also wish to discuss whether or not it would be appropriate to approve only the current speaker configuration and to require any additional speaker locations to come back to the BZA for approval. As stated above, the BZA does not have the authority as a part of the special use permit process to allow a level of noise that would violate the city's noise ordinance. In his letter to the board, Mr. Harney makes the commitment that the church will comply with the city's noise ordinance. Excuse me just a moment. However, at the time the staff comments were written, we needed further information, verification that the noise ordinance would continue to be complied with, or would be in that the church property would be in compliance with. At the time of the staff comments, we did not know whether or not the existing noise levels were compliant with the city's noise ordinance. And I do have some additional information on that for you in just a moment. Since the staff comments have gone out, there have been some additional developments. Now, just to show you some photographs, this is the Leadership Park parcel, 1833 New Salem Highway. As I mentioned, it is zoned commercial highway. So in order to have speakers on that property, and at this time it's not a certainty that the church wishes to install speakers there. They would just like the right to be able to do so in the future if they have to expand onto that property, expand additional parking. So that is the subject of the special use permit request and not the special use permit amendment request. This is the World Outreach Church main church building at 1921 New Salem Highway. It is zoned RS-15. This is the easternmost speaker in the parking lot, and it is east of the church building. And this is looking toward Barfield Road from the easternmost speaker. And this is looking south toward St. James Street from the easternmost speaker. And once again, looking south toward St. James Street. This is the middle speaker, which is just to the west of the church building. And this is looking southeast towards St. James Street. St. James Street actually terminates in a cul-de-sac just to the south of the speaker. And this is looking south towards St. James Street and Winslow Court from the middle speaker. And looking southwest towards the church parking lot from the middle speaker. And this is the westernmost speaker in that very southwest corner of the property. And this is looking northeast towards the church building and towards St. James Street and Winslow Court from the westernmost speaker. And this is looking east towards Winslow Court from the westernmost speaker, and looking southeast towards Winslow Court from the westernmost speaker. As I mentioned, that since earlier this year, this westernmost speaker has been disabled, so it has not been used since earlier this year after we got either the first or second complaint. As I mentioned, after the staff comments went out, the planning staff and a member of the police department met Mr. Harney and some of the church staff members out on the property. The police department's decibel reader is malfunctioning. So World Outreach Church had a decibel reader that we used. This was on Wednesday morning of last week. At 5 locations along the property line, you'll see them noted on this, what's on the TV in front of you, and there's also a copy of it at your stations as well. There were 5 locations that we used the decibel reader that morning. There was a slight breeze that morning, and at all 5 locations along the property line, the decibel reader measured less than 50 decibels. It did not. This particular decibel reader did not. If it was below 50 decibels, it did not pick up on. That was below its range of what it could read.
And this was with the westernmost speaker off?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. This is with the westernmost speaker off.
And the reason for it being off is that they felt like that it would go over that decibel reading, or
No.
what's the purpose in that one being off and the other two not?
That was something that they did after we received the either the first or second complaint. We contacted Mr. Harney, and in an attempt to mitigate the effects of the speakers on the neighbors, they turned that off after we had contacted them, and they have not turned it back on since then, to my knowledge. So the middle speaker and the easternmost speaker for a number of months have been the 2 speakers that have been operational. So on Wednesday morning, they did turn the speakers on, and they indicated that they were turned on to the levels that they are typically turned on Saturdays and Sundays, and the decibel readings were all below 50 decibels. And in looking at the noise ordinance, we as staff, while the noise ordinance is somewhat subjective in certain respects, we as staff did not feel that the decibel readings indicated that what was occurring right now was in violation of the city's noise ordinance. And we consulted with the legal department after the readings were taken, and I believe that they concurred with that interpretation as well.
Correct.
So that was some of the information that we were lacking at the time the staff comments went out, and I wanted to bring you up to speed on that. That because the standards for institutional group assembly uses do dictate that the board cannot approve anything that is in violation of the noise ordinance. So we wanted to make sure that with this application coming to you, that what was occurring currently was not in violation of the noise ordinance. It is, with that being said, it is audible at the property line in instances. So, but the level is not what we would believe to rise to be a noise ordinance violation. But with that being said, in order for the speakers to remain, the special use permit amendment request needs to be considered because the speakers right now are currently not in compliance with the special use permit request that was approved back in 2007 because those speakers were never specified. As I mentioned, the board does have the ability to put conditions if it so chooses, and there are numerous conditions that the board could consider. But with that being said, each request will require a separate motion by the board. Mr. Harney is available in attendance to answer any questions. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have from a staff standpoint, either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? Or I'll hear from the applicant first. All right, Mr. Harney, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Just a couple of comments to make, and thank you for looking at this application for us. Of course, as Matthew has stated, the reason we're here is because we didn't anticipate when we originally came in for the special use request about having the speakers in the parking lot, and mainly that use has been we've done a series of reading through the Bible in a year at the church, and that those speakers were installed in the parking lot for audible, actually reading of Scripture for those Sunday services, and that's where this use came to fruition. Now, the request for the possible speaker over at the Leadership Park property is mainly, I don't know whether Mr. Bromley can show that aerial or not, but we have a large grass area there sort of behind the Leadership Park building that may, depending on our attendance at the church, at some point in time, we may have to pave that parking area there that's grass now. And the reason for this request was that if we had expanded that parking area to the east and created a parking lot there and ever had the idea to continue this, we didn't want to be in violation if we put a speaker in that area. We can't say today that we're going to pave that area or going to do that this time, but rather than doing something and being non-compliant, that's the reason we put this request in. To answer the question, when we got the complaint earlier in the year about the speakers from the particular property owner that was on that sort of western end of, I believe it's Winslow Court, that's the reason we cut off the western speaker to hopefully alleviate the problem. And that's the reason it wasn't turned on the other day, because we were trying to reproduce the exact scenario that's been there for the last few months since we turned that speaker off. Now, to give you an example, I don't know the difference. If somebody tells me 50 decibels or 100 decibels, I don't know what to compare to. While we were there taking this, and Mr. Bromley was with us, for example, a motorcycle went down New Salem Highway accelerating, and that kicked it up to about 65 decibels, something like that, which is, I think, the bottom level of what the ordinance allows. Then it dropped down below 50 again. Dog barking in a yard, which was over to the east of us, that kicked up again to about 60, 65 decibels, and then dropped down to below 50 when that barking ceased. So just to give you an understanding, we had witnessed previously if a heat and air unit kicked on the house next door, that audible level kicked up to 60, 65, 70 in that range. But we want to be good neighbors. That's the reason we put in the level that we will make sure the speakers don't exceed the noise ordinance levels allowed. But we don't want to be in non-compliance, so that's the reason we're here to ask that these speakers that are there, we'll make sure the levels are turned in such a way that they don't violate the noise ordinance or harm the surrounding property owners.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Harney?
Yes, I got two. One's a curiosity question, and then one is just a question. Curiosity question is, are people in their cars listening to this? What's the?
In other words, as they get out of their cars and are walking across the parking lot,
okay,
going into church, there's basically somebody reading.
Okay.
So they're hearing somebody read.
So it would.
You can't hear it if you're in your car.
Okay. So would it be a fair statement then that these speakers would only be on, and I'm not making this as part of the application, this is just a question, but would it be a fair statement, because the church is asking it to be granted from 8 to 8, that these speakers really would only be on when an event or a service is being held at
Correct.
the church?
Yes, that's the reasoning behind it, and the reason we're not intending to have these on 8 to 8.
Right.
5, 6, 7 days a week.
Right.
The reason we didn't want to limit it to just Saturday and Sunday, if we had a special event, say on a Wednesday, or sometimes we have different things going on campus, if we had something that was sort of supporting that, even to a tune of saying this service is being held in Three Crosses Sanctuary. We've got a large campus now.
Right.
You can park and have to walk almost a half a mile from one end to the other. Sometimes it may be necessary for us just to audibly say this particular event is happening in Three Crosses or something like that.
Okay.
But no, we have no intentions of running it 8 to 8 every day.
Okay. The last question that I have is, if these two applications are granted, would it be your intent then to turn on the westernmost speaker again, or is your intent not to use that speaker anymore?
We hadn't planned to use it, but those speakers are mounted out there today.
Right.
So I didn't want to not show it on the site plan. Now, because we're asking for speakers in the parking lot, if we wanted to move that speaker into another location or like put a speaker down at Leadership Park, we wanted the ability to say these weren't the only speaker locations if we decided to move them, but we will stay in compliance with the noise ordinance.
Right.
So at our property lines, we are not breaking the ordinances as we're regarding sound level
Right.
onto adjacent properties.
I felt like we need to make that clear with respect to the adjacent property owners. I mean, you're turning it off now, but there could be a chance that it could be turned on in that area. It just might be a different area of that parking lot, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Move around, but we will monitor the sound level
Right.
so that no matter where we put them in the
Right.
parking lot, whether it's 10 feet away or 2,000 feet away, that they're in compliance.
Yeah, I don't think we need to leave here with the fact that someone thinks that there's not going to be a speaker in that area. The fact of the matter would be it's going to be compliant with the noise ordinance no matter where it is.
No matter where we put it.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Has the neighbor that's, I guess, had an issue with the sound, are they giving you any feedback after turning off that westernmost? Or is it just kind of that they filed a complaint, maybe what came with the city? And
I've never had any discussion
Okay.
with the neighbor that
Okay.
called. Mr. Bromley has.
does it
And I
help
think-
alleviate the issue any, or have they given you any feedback?
I think he might be in attendance today, and he might,
Okay.
during the public
Okay.
hearing, he might.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Harney.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct the public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, please come forward. If you would state your name and address for us, and any comments you may have.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm the one with the complaint. I'm the one that first started the complaining in January. Pardon me, I'm a little nervous up here, so
That's all right.
I hope I'm not on TV. But my name's Don Schneider. I live at 2055 Winslow Court, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. My house is in the county. Speaking about that westmosterly speaker there, I used to be involved in Boy Scouts. I came home that Sunday afternoon between 12 and 1 o'clock, and I had other family members or scouts in my truck to drop off because they left their vehicle at my house. And I heard the speaker up there. I thought it was a woman out in the parking lot talking about the day, the service. And she kept going on and on and on. And the wife came out of the house and says, I said, what, is that a woman up there speaking? She says, no, how'd you like that? She says, that was on Saturday and Sunday. So that was back in January 2012 when the speaker system had started. I called up Matthew, got a hold of the principal planner, told him what was the problem, because it was coming right down the hill that's there with the vacant house next door into our yard. Yes, they complied with that. They shut it off. The other situation I have is the middle speaker. World Outreach Church is located behind my house on New Salem Highway in the city limits. They have a sound system outside of the building with speakers on 2 to 3 parking light poles. They have used these speakers to broadcast a tape Bible since about January 2012. The playtime is Saturday from approximately 2:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and Sundays from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. I am home on Saturdays. I spend my time outside. I hear it. Sunday mornings, I leave from my church approximately 9:30. I don't come home till 1 in that area there. Recently, the sound system has been on for the past 4 to 5 Sundays from 7:30 to about 7 p.m. Last night, it was on till about 8 p.m., which was about 12 hours all day long. Myself and my family can clearly hear the words from either the backyard, when my garage is open, or back porch steps. I am probably the only one noticing this or complaining about this problem because we are outside on Saturdays. Very few neighbors are outside like we are all day long. Our neighbors are not outside as much as we are. Of the 19 homes in this small subdivision, there are 7 that are privately owned. 1 attends World Outreach Church, and the other 6 do not. The other 12 homes are owned by World Outreach Church, in which 5 of them are vacant, and the other 7 are people who work for World Outreach Church who attends the church. I understand in the city there is no type of sound system that can be permanently attached or used away from the building, as you stated before, only attached to the building. I feel that our subdivision should not have to listen to these tapes. If I'm not mistaken, last Saturday when I was home, they were not playing. It was very nice. It was quiet. I also would like to ask John, number 1, why and what is the purpose to have this system on even when there's nobody outside in the parking lot? People have already gone into the building for their services, and the speakers are still playing. Why? Is there not enough preaching going on inside the service? Is that not enough? Does the people attending the services, as they're leaving their cars, going to the building, appreciate hearing this speaker system? And yes, I understand you were out there Wednesday, and it didn't hit 50 decibels, but there are times when that speaker is on loud, and it comes right between Pat Turner's driveway, right into our backyard. Pat Turner is the one that lives behind me to the left. Her driveway butts up to his the driveway going down. People who come to visit to the services, they hear it going to the service, coming out to the service. That's it. We have to hear it from 7:30 till 1 on Sundays and on Saturday afternoons. So we constantly hear it. Upon notification of this, they still played the system, even though they knew they were in violation of the code and not have a permit to play it. If this permit is approved, what regulations will be applied to the church as far as usage? And if approved, other churches will also come to put speakers in their parking lot, and you may have problems with their residents also too. Thank you very much for letting me speak. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Anyone else present wishing to speak?
Is this yours?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Hey, gentlemen. My name is Mark Gray. I live at 2054 St. James Street. I was just curious if the speakers, as they are now, are they adequate for what y'all are wanting to do now in that particular side of the parking lot?
Sir, if you will address your comments to us, we'll try to get them answered when you're...
The speakers that are there now, I was just curious if they're adequate for what they need to do right now, or are they going to add another speaker between the middle and the east speaker?
After the public hearing, we can have Mr. Harney come up and address that.
We'll address that for you.
They do. It does wake my wife up on Sunday mornings, and that frustrates her. But before that, I would like to thank the pastor for inviting us to a meeting before the construction began on the new building. He invited us to a meeting. We sat down and talked with him. He was very gracious. And I want to thank him for honoring every word that he mentioned during that meeting, what he was going to do and not going to do. He's honored every word of that. And I want to personally thank the members of World Outreach for being very good neighbors, polite, very good neighbors. It's been actually pleasant living there during the construction and afterwards. I have no complaints at all, except to speak for my wife, that it does wake her up on Sunday mornings. That bothers her. Thank you for turning the volume down from originally where it was when they first began broadcasting. They have turned the volume down. It's not extremely loud for us. I can see the speaker. I would just ask that you don't install any more speakers between the east and the middle speaker, because that's right there in my front yard. If you want to add speakers other than that anywhere, be fine with me, anywhere else. And if you keep the levels that they are now, that would be fine. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gray. A question about additional speakers. What my understanding that the speakers they proposed, and maybe one possibly by the leadership of the building?
Well, Vice Chairman Young, the application would, it's left kind of open-ended. The board could specify the existing speakers, either the 2 or the 3 locations. It could leave it open-ended, like what the application requests, to where the church would have the leeway to put speakers or to install new speakers at different locations, or to move the existing speakers to other locations in the parking lot. So there are a variety of ways that the board could review this application, a variety of conditions that could possibly be placed. So I think it's kind of at this point it's kind of open ended.
Okay. Have something additional you'd like to add, Mr. Harney?
Well, just to respond to a couple of comments. Number one, we don't have any intentions of increasing the loudness of the speakers as they exist today. I think what we'd be willing to do is say if we added any speakers, that we would not add any speakers any closer to the adjacent property lines than they are today. In other words, like I said, the application request for the Leadership Park property was basically, should we ever put a parking lot there, we might want to place a speaker there. But I think we're more than willing to agree to the restriction that we won't place any speakers any closer to any property lines than exist today. Our intention is to leave the speakers where they are and possibly put another speaker on that end of the campus. But we very well could do something that's more out closer to Salem Highway along our frontage, so to speak, which is actually getting away from residential properties rather than getting closer.
Okay. Thank you for that. Don't believe I've closed the public hearing. Is anyone else trying to look over would like to speak?
I have one request, that when they're reading the scriptures, that perhaps they use a different voice other than the James Earl Jones monotone, that maybe they use someone who has a lively, more animated voice, perhaps, maybe a little more pleasant.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else present wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion and motions.
Mr. Harney, I have one question. Pastor Jackson may want to. I kind of see where the gentleman's coming from, where it's on for 6 hours straight. Do we have people coming in and out for that length of time? Is there a way that we could kind of, and not restrict it as part of this application, but maybe as a good neighbor where we are only having it for a certain time frame before and after? I mean, I understand the intent of it, but I thought maybe people were sitting out there listening to it. I understand that part, but if there's nobody in the parking lot, is there an intent for it to be on that for that whole time frame? You follow what I'm trying to ask?
I follow what you're trying to ask. We've got 2 services on Sunday, and people start entering in the campus. Actually, people start entering in the campus probably at 7 o'clock on Sundays. And to be quite frank, there's people entering the campus all through the morning, and then everyone is basically leaving the campus by 12:30 or 1 o'clock. Since we have an 8:30 service, we have a 10:30 service, and you have people coming and going, whether they're volunteers working as a volunteer during one service and then actually attending another, or vice versa. That was our intent, because if you go out there and watch, there is a large group comes in before the 8:30 service. Then there's people sort of flowing in and out, depending on where they're working during the service or coming in late, or whatever the case may be. But there is sort of a flow in and out of campus through those hours.
Is that true of Saturday also, from 2:30
no.
to 8:30?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not. We could do something to limit that. I don't know. Pastor Jackson can. Well, I take that. There are two services on Saturday afternoon, but it's not. It's the first one starts at 5. Second one starts at 7. We could shorten the time that we start that one. I mean, we don't have to start them at noon on Saturday, is my point.
Right.
We could start it closer to the service time on Saturday afternoon, but we have 2 services at 5 and 7 on Saturday.
I think that if we could just have a compromise here, and again, I'm not trying to limit the times as part of this application, but try to work with the intent of having the reason why it's on,
Right.
And y'all have expressed why the intent of having it on, and then so if that intent is there's no need with respect to that intent, then maybe we don't need to have it on.
Well, we can start maybe like we've asked for these others, maybe start that 30 to 45 minutes before service, cutting off at the same time, which is basically the cutting off at 8 o'clock at night, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's about 30, 45 minutes prior to the first service, about 30, 45 minutes prior to the end of the last service. We'll be glad to work on those same parameters.
I would agree with Mr. Halliburton that that's a compromise. Probably, I would feel more comfortable with that based on what we've heard. I guess the question is whether that's part of a motion or whether it needs to be versus kind of an oral agreement.
I would trust with whom we are dealing with that could get worked out without having to make it part of the application.
Okay.
Well, I would just like to say thanks for being a good neighbor, willing to make the changes. And if there's no further discussion, I wish to make a motion to approve the special use permit.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, very briefly, I don't have a problem, frankly, either way with whether we leave it open, that the applicant is agreeing to cooperate in terms of shortly before until so shortly after events, as opposed to letting the system run for all day. It could be part of the motion or not. That's fine with me. But I do want to make a comment about the open-endedness of this. As a staff member, I'm a little concerned about allowing future speakers to be placed at some unknown at this time location, and then if there is a problem, it's incumbent on us as staff to work backwards, to go question the special use permit or the placement of it, rather than the burden being on the applicant, as I think it generally is and should be, for them to show us that this is what we want to do and this is how we expect it to affect people or not affect people. I think the board has the power to grant the open-ended as is requested. Just as a staff person, I have a bit of a concern about that approach.
That's a good point. Good point.
And one thing that I would, ask for some additional specificity on would be with regards to the westernmost speaker that was turned off. If I guess that would be a moot point if it's left open-ended. But if we were to put or if the board were to put some type of, if it were to say that you are approving the existing speakers, I think it would be good to know whether or not that westernmost speaker, which was the one that's been turned off for some number of months, would be a part of the approval as well. And then also remember, we have two separate motions that we will need, or two separate requests that we will need motions on. The special use permit for 1833 New Salem Highway, which is the commercial highway zone portion, and then the special use permit amendment for 1921 New Salem Highway.
Okay.
So is the motion dead now?
I guess they would like for us to clear it up whether we want to allow the westernmost speaker and, I guess, additional speaker placement if they would. I guess they asked for the leeway to place one, I guess, in any location towards the Leadership Park. That's the question, where we want to make them come back and see us at that time to where that one's placed.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking this was for the Leadership Park, and it is further away from the residential area.
So your
My
motion
motion is
pertained to
for
the
the-
1833.
Yes, the
Okay.
first one, the special use.
And certainly it's less of an issue, that tract that is zoned commercial highway, I believe, certainly is further away from any residential uses. The volume would have to be cranked up quite high, I think, for it to be heard substantially at any of the existing residential properties are in that area. So that is different than I guess leaving it open in terms of the other property.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the 1833 New Salem Highway with the ability to place a speaker where they choose in the future.
And this application has the same time restrictions, correct? The 8 to 8?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And there are none. That portion of the application has been approved. Next, we can deal with the second piece, the 1921 New Salem Highway. I guess that's the main campus. I guess we need to deal with the westernmost speaker and new placement, what that brings if they wish to add.
I'll make a comment. Mr. Ives, I understand the whole burden of the policing effect of this issue. We'll first off talk about the decibel level. We all understand that if they, don't meet the noise ordinance, it doesn't make any difference anyway. But we've got that issue in and of itself, that if we got another complaint, that we would have to see whether or not that decibel level has risen.
Correct.
So that would lead me to believe that, you either kind of grant this motion with the knowing that they're going to have to meet the decibel level no matter what, or you don't grant it at all if you're afraid that that decibel level is not going to be met. I do, to a degree, understand, and I'm the one that brought it up, the whole restriction with respects to the time frames that they would have the speakers on. I would hope that that they would work through that as part of this process. So at this point, I'm not real sure that I would want to change those time frames, because again, that is something that it would burden the city staff to police if it becomes more restrictive. So I would almost rather lay that burden on World Outreach to be a good neighbor with respects to the times that are played versus it being more restrictive. With respects to the speaker and the western portion of the property, I get back to the whole decibel level issue. I think that that's going to be the main issue at hand, irrespective of whether there's a speaker Western Middle or towards the Leadership Park area. With that, or with those comments, I'll make a motion that we approve the application as submitted for the second application, and then we'll see what comments the rest of the board has.
I'll give a motion. Do we have a second to that, or any discussion at this point?
I'll make a second because I've lived in that area for a long time, and they have always been such a wonderful, respectful people there, so I'll make a second on that. Second the motion.
Okay. Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application's been approved. Next item is staff reports and other business.
Vice Chairman Young, the only thing that I would mention is that each of you, and I think that some of you may already be on the road to getting this done or having it already turned in. Ms. Davis provided you with the annual form that you're required to fill out for our finance department and our legal department, and if you could just make sure that Ms. Davis gets a copy of that prior to December 31st, or excuse me, January 31st, we would appreciate that very much.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, sir. I believe that's it. So hope everybody has a happy holiday season and happy
You as
New
well.
Year.
You as well. All right, we will adjourn.